Yeah, so I'm James Smith. I'm in the School of English and Digital Humanities at University College Cork, and I like this synergy session. Often find myself straddling, the needs to think of interesting and creative ways of using georeferences, geodata in the process of a project I'm a part of called Ports Past and Present, but also often considering the long-term data management needs of the project as a whole, not just the geodata, but a wider variety of metadata and documents. And because we are funded by the EU Regional Development Fund, we have certain obligations in terms of data management and open science, open data. And I imagine that you will all be in the same position too. So having a sort of overlap between the working groups, the Geohumanities working group, and the conceptual and technical sort of challenges and issues and developments of geohumanities, which are always a fast-moving target, and research data management and best practice in metadata, etc. Then I think we might find an interesting route through the two that will be mutually beneficial to anyone who's interested in one, the other, or both. And just before we begin, I'll say that we've kind of focused this whole session on cycles, essentially. So we're about to start a session where we talk from three different perspectives. The beginning, planning a project and considering data management and geohumanities needs, which my colleague Anna Barcz will be talking about. Then in myself, which is basically the middle, being embroiled in the sort of nitty-gritty of changing one's goals on the fly to meet the needs of a project and basically, trying to hit a moving target. In the middle, having done a data management plan, having tried to set oneself up as best as possible. Then we'll end with Erzsébet, who I'm sure you're all familiar with, the Open Science Officer for DARIAH, who will talk about where does it all go after that? What is the end point of the cycle? So, and then as Erzsébet mentioned, we'll go into a breakout session where we have a series of themes that, as is mentioned in the chat, you can sign up for and indicate your preference. Otherwise, we'll use Zoom to assign you to a breakout, and then we'll report back, and then we'll have a wider conversation, which Becca Kahn, who is another colleague who is a part from the Geohumanities Working Group, will be helping to run us through the research data lifecycle and think about scholarly primitives, the topic of this annual meeting, and break it down into sort of steps and useful bits and phases and considerations and processes. So without further ado, I'll move us along to Anna, and then I'll talk, and then we'll go to Erzsébet, and then we'll take it from there. So thank you for coming.
So I am Anna Barcz, and I currently work in the Institute of Literary Research. And I've been totally new in digital humanities, so I'm here more to learn and consult and share with the challenges that I'm facing in case of the data that I'm dealing with. And I've been working on textual, mostly on textual materials so far. So I would be really happy, because of my background, to be involved in the discussion around environmental humanities and where digital humanities and literary scholarship can meet. And I want to tell you very briefly about the data that and how we plan to design a project that we finished already. And if you can, Erzsébet, if it's possible to show very briefly what kind of infographic we prepared. And this is a very, I would say, it was like 3 years ago. And so we were dealing with literary texts and with the history around the Odra River. And we were dealing, of course, with the changing borders. So the materials before the wars in the interwar period and after the Second World War. the idea was a very challenging one to gather the biographically, this was the criterion, writers who were not only living for some time or their whole life at the Odra, but also the ones who were writing about it. And so you can see that we tried to indicate their nationality, which was a complex because of these changing borders. And some identities were connected with the region, with Silesia. And we had this this tool to change the borders and see where the people, where the texts were, if they were before the war, after the war. And it was interesting that we also indicated people who were referring to the Odra, like centered their approach on the river more. So this was one project, but now now I am I am having and I'm struggling with a project that is more, let's say, ambitious, because we are trying to combine the aquacritical reading on the Vistula River, where the borders didn't change, but of course Poland was for some time outside of what we call cartographical tradition, yes, and we do not have much sources about it. So so how to put different kinds of materials, maps especially, and how the river as such has been changing because of regulations, because of moving its flow, let's say. And but on the other hand, I am very much interested in including such fuzzy, let's say, categories as different memories and also threads, and not only in a form of what we call historical snapshots, because I am quite aware of such projects, like, for example, about the Danube, how the Danube has been changing. And in case of big cities, we do have some materials about it. But I am interested in how to map how to put it, qualitative research, like concepts and metaphors, and how do they influence the environmental, let's say, message. Yes, so it's quite difficult, but I think eco-criticism and the reading that where the river is centralized hasn't been merged with digital humanities and geohumanities. So it's and it's quite surprising, because it's always about the space and the changes of the space and the historical relationship between humans and the river. So I'm very much interested in such tools, and that can multiply the layers of what is not called repository. I would call it more under this umbrella of deep mapping project. So in fact, this was the when I was thinking about planning this project. So the first phase is to collect all the sources, which are very different, yes, because there are visual sources and textual sources, but also environmental perspectives. So what has been done to the river, yes, what kind of constructions, what kind of transformations, physical transformations. And I am interested in how not to lose this interpretive value of dealing with those sources. So So I think that just to end this very, so I think I will serve in a way as a case study. This case study will be in my bag, and we initially thought that maybe it's enough to have some kind of GIS software to do that, but because we want, but it's not enough, and and I think that that I would say that my aim or my vision is how to integrate, in what tools to use to integrate this aquacritical close reading and interpretation with creating very useful database, and which will be very dynamic and which will be very multi-layered. So I think I would end here.
And I suppose picking up from there, I mean, the project I'm a part of, which I'll just I'll do a little screen share for you actually of the website for the project, so you can see what I'm actually talking about when I talk. If you just bear with me. So ports past and present is, as I said, but you can see actually the sort of descriptor for it, that it's a multi-country, multi-regional project across Wales and Ireland, studying the sort of cultural heritage of port towns on the Irish Sea basin. So we've got 5 ports communities: Dublin Port, Rosslare, the sites of Rosslare Europort in County Wexford in Ireland. Those are both Irish ports. Then in Wales, we have Holyhead, and then we have Fishguard, and we have Pembroke Dock, which are both down here in Pembrokeshire. Now, basically, the brief that I had to start with was to show the depth of history of the port communities. The work package I'm in is about bringing the past to life. So essentially, it's a public humanities digital storytelling initiative. And we settled on Omeka as our content management system. And more specifically, we're using a theme and series of plugins called Curatescape that was developed for urban history, public urban history, originally for Cleveland, Ohio, but it has been used for lots of other cities as well. And it's quite an attractive one for us because not only does it have, as you can see, this is leaflet, like a leaflet integration for the geolocations, which Omeka with it has it. So basically, this is our problem. So it gives you all these affordances, and you can have a really nice looking website. But what you're basically doing is starting with something that's very fair data interoperable. The Dublin core metadata set, which is, core vanilla Omeka is extremely interoperable and very, very easy to export your data into CSV, very little refinement or change needed to then reuse it somewhere else. But then you add on the geolocation plugin. Yes, it's associating the geolocation, the latitude and the longitude. So let's have a look at a story. This is our most recent one, but it's associating like a georeference with it. But at the same time, it is not part of the metadata of the story. It is not a Dublin core attribute. It has been filed under the item, but it is not accessible unless you, what I often have done in my other projects is add in the latitude and longitude into the location attribute for the item, because there's always talk that eventually geolocation will just be able to pull that out of that attribute and just straight away put it in the map. And I think it will happen, but so far that has not been a thing that has been available. But then, of course, you're adding another theme and plugins onto, and depending on the geolocation plugin, which is itself dependent on the core Omeka. So we're already getting quite complicated in terms of research data management, in terms of like, what's the best way to pull this stuff out? Because I definitely want to use it in the future. I would like very much. I mean, there are exhibits, and like Neatline is a very useful exhibit suite that you have for Omeka. There are other ways of doing really nice Omeka exhibits, but those are within shop drawing on data that's already in Omeka. But then my question now, we have a data management plan, we have redundant backups, we have a bunch of ways we're sort of saving XML and CSVs from the stories, and we're archiving them, like creating web archive versions of them to preserve them as they look, and like different ways. But what am I going to do other than sort of add in the latitude and longitude and create my own tabular data? Like, then the question I've got to ask myself is how is the most convenient way I can put this all together and set it up so that when we're done with all these stories, because there's 20 stories now, but there'll probably be over 100 by the end. Where is it? Because we would very much like to be able to archive not only the CSV of the stories themselves, the text, etc., but I would like to be able to, separately archive the spatial data. But what I'm looking at is a series of essentially hacks by various projects to add functionality to Omeka. So we'll be talking a bit later about pipelines, like how do you join a pipe to another pipe when you're talking about a bunch of things created by different people with their own distinct design needs, and how then do you ensure that you go all the way smoothly through the cycle? When you're talking about, sure, when you look at the front end of an Omeka website, it looks great, but then basically it's a bunch of things all sort of bolted together behind the scenes because it's so interoperable, because it's open software, because it's so well established and robust. That's great for functionality, but it means that the things behind the scenes do not always 100% connect up to each other. So, for example, this is basically a leaflet map that's being served up with a nice background map from Mapbox. It also makes JSONs for mobile viewing, so it's very good for mobile optimization, this particular theme. But all that's just done on the fly and not necessarily captured in a way that, like, I would love it if there were, say, GeoJSONs or JSONs that I could export from this. Not necessarily an option, but I would like it to be. And I know that there are people thinking about these things as well, because Omeka is so popular and a lot of the fixes are already being developed, but I'm just trying to keep an eye on them so that I don't paint myself into a corner, essentially, at the end of the actual active phase of our project, which goes till 2023. So I imagine that sort of messy middle phase is probably quite familiar for those dealing with data management and geohumanities at the same time. And now we can move into Erzsébet and talking about sort of how to responsibly go towards the end of that process.
James was talking about the middle phase of the research workflow, and let me very quickly give a small teaser about the breakout room for a breakout room dedicated to the end phase of a project life cycle. And so if you're wondering, like, why bother, why publishing your data as openly as possible, here is a little reminder from Gregory Crane about the essential precondition of doing digitally enabled research, that is sharing and building on each other's resources beyond what is available in a research paper. But if you think about it, it can escalate into quite a fragmented, fuzzy landscape very easily. If you think about different kinds of outputs of a research project, there might be stuff that you are publishing at the end, but there might be stuff that you are storing in a repository, subject-specific or institutional one. There is a project website, and of course, there are stuff that probably you will never share. So the question is how to optimize, how to interlink all these messy outputs in a meaningful way. And so I have to confess that I'm not I'm much less invested in geohumanities as any of you. So I'm just guessing here, but what I see as a major conflict when it comes to publishing your research data is something similar that was already put forward by our colleague Katrina Fenlon, who says that much of humanities digital scholarship is essentially interactive. New modes of production and publication in the humanities are intended for user interaction through dynamic, responsive, and even openly participatory representations based on research context. So one difficulty in packing our data in neat packages, our cold data in neat packages, and putting it to the repository is that we are risking to lose all these participatory layers. And I think if you are working with geospatial data, this is an issue that is even more relevant than working with surveys or other kinds of data types. So I put here a very nice example. I think Lou Bernard is with us, which I find, like the archaeologists, is just a nice and best practice example that shows that you don't always need to compromise between having a sector and public repository to make your data available on the long term, but not losing this contextual participatory interface and discovery layer from the top of it that keeps the whole thing alive. So in the breakout, we are going to discuss nitty-gritties of sustainable and meaningful data publications in the context of geohumanities. I put a couple of questions here that people usually used to ask, but I'm much more curious about your questions. I prepared with some real-life examples, like publications that are openly available in different repositories, and we can take a look at them together and